Okay, well in the middle of my series, my 20-part series to Russ Miller, I don't remember their name, but one of you out there, one of my subscribers, made a request and asked that I talk about some of my work, especially my work with Native Alaskan and curriculum writing. And so I thought it was an excellent suggestion. And so to whoever you are, if I can find it, I'll put a link down below or a annotation or something to acknowledge. Thank you for the suggestion. It's great. So I thought I'm going to explain a little bit about what I do. Now, again, I've mentioned before, my work over the last few years has been project-oriented, meaning I do contracted short projects, and this is one of the projects that's been occupying my time, and it's writing curriculum regarding traditional ecological knowledge and Native Alaskan cultures. Now, a lot of you, I'm sure, don't know what that is. But then again, welcome to the club. Most, even those of us who are supposedly experts, don't know what it is. So traditional ecological knowledge is the overlap between science, we call it, when I say Western science, I'm not sure the term is really applicable, but you guys know what I'm talking about. Modern science, scientific method, peer review, the whole process of science. But where that overlaps with the traditions, the stories, the religious beliefs of indigenous peoples worldwide, and that might seem like it might seem counterintuitive, but it actually makes a lot of sense if you can sort of look at the point of it, because I fully believe, and I think there's some support for it, that at the least in an early form, maybe it's been some of the purpose has been lost over time, but in an early form, the belief systems of a people, the mythologies, the stories, the traditions of a people served a lot of different functions. Group cohesiveness, for example, we believe in this god, or we have this, we're under the protection of this god, they're under the protection of the other god, that sort of a thing. But also through these stories, information was transmitted. So there would be a story of this god, and this god goes and does blank, and there's a hero comes out, and whatever it happens to be, with a message at the end of it, whether the message be, be nice to each other, or respect your elders, or whatever the storyline is. So there's a lesson involved in a lot of these traditions, in all of these traditions really. But there's also embedded in these stories is observations about the natural world. Now, you're aware, I think to a certain point, the elements, the basics of the scientific method are kind of hardwired into us. That doesn't mean that we don't go way astray and everything like that with them. But I'm saying we make observations, we use those observations to then make predictions about future events. Eventually, if something holds true, it becomes incorporated it becomes part of our knowledge. And I think people have been doing this for tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. And so when you look at the traditions of indigenous peoples, you see their stories, and throughout their stories are things about where animals migrate, where is something going to be at a particular time of year. What about stories that involve the harvest, when to harvest, how much to harvest, things like that. And I believe that these stories were probably, those elements of the stories were probably crafted over time, meaning that trial and error, they were incorporated as important because people messed up, over-harvested, starvation happened, so they tried something different. Maybe that didn't work, maybe something different, and that worked. And then what works, the meme evolves and then gets written into the stories. How do you transmit it? That you don't have peer review, you have storytelling. You have elders telling stories. That generation grows up with the stories. They may not know the reasons why. They may not be do this or you'll starve to death. The reason may be why. Do this because the gods want it this way. If that makes sense. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling here. This is going to be kind of a rambly thing. So I got involved in this. Now, one of the things I've learned is that this field, there are people who actually are researching it professionally, but overall, a lot of the people interested in it are people who sort of took on themselves to become their local experts, if that makes sense. So a school teacher becomes interested in the subject and starts researching it, goes to a few meetings because we actually do meet, and learns, wow, there's there's a whole other people looking at the same sort of area, and that person kind of represents it and kind of brings some of this curriculum into their school or develops curriculum and such like I do. But I'm going to tell you where it started from. Now, I was a professor at Sheldon Jackson College in Sitka, Alaska, and one of my jobs there was to teach summer camps, which were it's kind of a long story, but anyway, it was a grant I was paid under, was a summer camp to bring Native Alaskan students from around the state who excelled in math and science, and they would do an intense 6-week-long science summer camp where they would learn mathematics, things like GIS and IT stuff, also biology, ecology, things like that, oceanography. So we would incorporate, like, it was a really, really intense, like 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. They were in classes and broken up, of course, with things like canoe trips, kayaking trips, swimming at the pool, and these kinds of things, basketball. And we would bring elders in to talk about this. So there would be a cultural element, there was a language element, there's a whole bunch of things. It was a pretty amazing little program. But one of the things that caught my attention during this is that there's a story, and this kind of relates to what I'm talking about here, is that there's a tradition amongst some of the Yupik groups. Now, Yupik is a large, very diverse group of people under one sort of big tribal, it's more of a language name. But Yupik out on the Alaska Peninsula, I was listening to an elder talk about the stories, talk about what the these traditions are, and one of the traditions that this group of Yupik did is every 20, 30 years or so, the shaman of the tribe, of the particular group, would suddenly get a vision or whatever, and would I don't know, I'm not gonna insult by trying to suggest, I don't know what it was, but somehow the shaman would know it's time to gather up all of our fishing gear, and the whole community would burn their fishing gear, destroy their gear, all gone. And what was interesting about that is that, now remember, this is the Alaska Peninsula. There's a lot of places where things like trees, available wood to make fishing gear, is something of a limited supply. The things for the rope and all this kind of stuff, the skins and things they need for the rope, all of this stuff is kind of hard to get a hold of. It's not as easy. So this was a major event, and they would destroy it and then make new gear. But the trick is they would make a different kind of gear. The gear they would destroy, let's say if it was for fish fishing, halibut, cod, pollock, these kinds of things. If the gear was designed for that, for this 20, 30 year period, they would be using that. Then the next gear they would make would be for crabs and shrimp. So they would move from a fish economy to a crustacean economy. And they would do that for 20 or 30 years until the shaman would again say, time to destroy the gear. They would get rid of that gear and go for ground fish again. And they would do this cycle for however many centuries or whatever they've been doing it. Now, when I first heard this, immediately something fired in my little brain. It's like, I just read a paper by Worm and Myers about the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which is the fact that the Pacific Ocean, the North Pacific, has high temperature regimes and low temperature regimes at 20 to 30 year cycles. During the high temperature regimes, fish populations increase dramatically. Larva fish have a higher survivability. That means that adult fish have a higher survivability. Their reproductive capacity is increased. There's more ground fish. During the low temperature regimes, ground fish do poorly, but crustacean larvae have a higher survivability. Crustaceans have a higher fecundity during that time period. So crustacean populations will increase during the peaks of this high period. And not knowing this, meaning that as fisheries biologists, this wasn't really recognized until about 2002, but it explained some past events. For example, collapse of some of the crab fisheries, because the crab fisheries were peaking at the time when the crab population was at its lowest cycle, if that makes sense. So overfishing the crab at their decline brought the population below a certain point of where it's very difficult, if possible at all, to recover from, if that makes sense. And so to me it was fascinating that's like this was an actual observed natural event that's been known for however many centuries, assuming, and yet was just recently discovered, by us biologists who are supposed to be the experts in it, and this is known. So it made me think, how many other things like this are out there? So I started looking into it with these stories, and with the summer camps, I'd talk to the kids. They'd tell me stories that they remember and stuff like that, and then I would contact their elders from the various places in Alaska they're from, and sort of interview elders here and there, trying to get this together, and it was fascinating. And then there was a big meeting in Anchorage about TEK, the traditional ecological knowledge, and since I had been working with it, I was sent up to the meeting where I met other people in a wide variety of different agencies, from education to politics to fishing game, NOAA fisheries and such, that are all doing the same sort of thing, looking at the same events. And that's where I met people, got hired on for more summer camps to do, and got eventually hired to write little curriculum blocks that will eventually be incorporated into Alaska schools. This isn't just for Native students, this is for all people. And what these curriculum are now, sorry for that long explanation, but what this curriculum involves is where it's a unit. For example, if the class unit is covering, say, salmon ecology, that's what the unit's about. It's a salmon course, salmon part of the course. They would have papers if it was high school, so there'd be some papers on salmon and their ecology. Then there would be elders that would come into the class, and they would tell there's a traditional Northwest story that's found from Alaska down to California called Salmon Boy, that is about a little boy whose people are disrespecting the salmon people, and so the salmon people take him away to their village under the ocean, where he's taught how to catch salmon, how to prepare salmon respectfully, and how to take care of the streams, when to fish, when not to fish, how many salmon to get, and all of these kinds of things. So he's taught this lesson about, basically, which is really, it's stuff today that's enforced by law. It's based on fisheries biology. A lot of the same principles. Don't disturb the salmon during spawning. These kinds of things. And it's really important. And so I would use it. For example, one of the lessons in the story is to take the carcasses of the salmon and put them back into the river, like the heads, parts you don't eat, the skin, the bones go back into the river, and it's really important. And if this isn't done, the salmon people say they can't regenerate, and kind of thing. And it's a mythological thing in that. But in reality, when you remove salmon from salmon streams and the carcasses are disposed of, it's now been found that the nutrients from those salmon, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the calcium, which are all limiting resources in eastern Pacific forests, temperate rainforests, these limiting resources are basically the salmon are bringing marine nutrients. They're out there eating copepods and herring and such like that. They go upstream, they spawn and die. Their carcasses rot. Bugs are eating their carcasses. Sometimes our bears will eat them, and then the bear will walk out into the woods and that's excrete the remains of the salmon. All of that's nutrients being brought, and without that, in places where salmon have been depleted from streams, they're seeing a noticeable reduction in productivity of forest systems. Kind of interesting. Now it's ongoing research, and I don't know how solidified it is. But they know things like, for example, deer actually will eat the salmon bones for the calcium, because calcium again is a limiting resource in a lot of Pacific Northwest forests. And so this lesson in there about disposing of the carcasses actually has a scientific basis behind it. It's actually important for keeping the stream alive, even though that's not the purpose given in the story for it. The end result is the same.